before the story begins, let everything else soften. The noise of the day can stay outside this moment. Here, nothing is required of you. Find a comfortable stillness. Let your breath slow and allow the world to fade to a quiet distance. Tonight's tale is an old fairy whisper, gentle, luminous, and meant to be drifted through rather than followed. If this space feels safe or warm to you, you may return anytime. A like or a subscription is simply a doorway, never an obligation. I often wonder where these stories land, in which rooms, beneath which skies, at what hour of night. If it feels right, you can leave a note sharing where you are and how late the night has grown. Now, let the lights dim. Let a soft sound settle in. There's nowhere to rush, nowhere to arrive. Just drift, slowly, into the story waiting for you. Clumsy Hans. Out in the country, there was an old mansion where an old squire lived with his 2 sons, who were so witty that they thought themselves too clever for words. They decided to go out and propose to the king's daughter, which they were at liberty to do, for she had announced publicly that she would take for a husband the man who had the most to say for himself. The 2 brothers made their preparations for 8 days beforehand. That was all the time they had, but it was enough, for they had many accomplishments, and everyone knows how useful they can be. One of them knew the whole Latin dictionary by heart and the town's newspaper for 3 years, so well that he could repeat it backward or forward. The other had learned all the articles of law and knew what every alderman must know. Consequently, he was sure he could talk of governmental affairs, and besides this, he could embroider suspenders, for he was very gentle and also clever with his fingers. "I shall win the princess," they both said, as their father gave each one of them a beautiful horse. The one who had memorized the dictionary and the newspapers had a coal-black horse, while the one who knew all about governmental affairs and could embroider had a milk-white one. Then they smeared the corners of their mouths with cod liver oil to make them more glib. All the servants assembled in the courtyard to watch them mount their horses, but just then the 3rd brother came up. For there were really 3, although nobody paid much attention to the 3rd, because he was not so learned as the other 2. In fact, everybody called him Clumsy Hans. "Where are you going in all your Sunday clothes?" he asked. "To the king's court, to woo the princess. Haven't you heard what the king's drummer is proclaiming all over the country?" Then they told him about it. "Gracious," said Clumsy Hans, I guess I'll go too." But his brothers only burst out laughing at him as they rode away. "Father," shouted Clumsy Hans, "let me have a horse. I feel like getting married too. If she takes me, she takes me. And if she doesn't take me, I'll take her anyway." "That's a lot of nonsense," replied his father. "You'll get no horse from me. Why, you don't know how to talk properly. Now, your brothers are intelligent men. If I can't have a horse, I'll take the billy goat," said Clumsy Hans. "He belongs to me, and he can carry me very well." So he mounted the billy goat, dug his heels into its sides, and galloped off down the highway. "Alley-oop! What a ride! Here I come!" shouted Clumsy Hans, singing so loud that his voice was heard far away. But his two brothers rode quietly on ahead of him. They were not speaking a word to each other, for they were thinking about all the clever speeches they would have to make. And of course, these had to be carefully prepared and memorized beforehand. "Hello!" cried Clumsy Hans. "Here I come. Look what I found on the road." Then he showed them a dead crow he had picked up. "Clumsy," said the brothers. "What are you going to do with that?" "Why, I am going to give it to the princess." "Yes, you do that," they said, as they rode on laughing. "Hello! Here I come again. Just look what I've found this time. You don't find things like this in the road every day." So the brothers turned around to see what it was this time. "Clumsy," they said. "That's just an old wooden shoe, and the upper part's broken off anyway. Is the princess going to have that too?" "She certainly is," replied Hans, and the brothers again laughed and rode on far in advance of him. "Hello! Here I am again!" shouted Clumsy Hans. "Now this is getting better and better. This is really something." "Well, what have you found this time?" asked the brothers. "Oh, I can't really tell you," Clumsy Hans said. "How pleased the princess will be." "Ah," said the brothers. "Why, it's nothing but mud out of the ditch. Yes, of course," said Clumsy Hans, "but the very finest sort of mud. Look, it runs right through your fingers." Then he filled his pockets with it. But his brothers galloped on ahead as fast as they could. And so they arrived at the town gate a full hour ahead of Hans. At the gate, each suitor was given a numbered ticket, and as fast as they arrived, they were arranged in rows, 6 to a row, packed together so tightly that they could not even move their arms. That was a wise plan, for otherwise they could have cut each other's backs to pieces, just because one stood in front of another. All the inhabitants of the town stood around the castle, peering in through the windows to watch the princess receive her suitors. But as each young man came into the room, he became tongue-tied. "No good," said the princess. "Take him away." Now came the brother who had memorized the dictionary, but he had completely forgotten it while standing in line. The floor creaked under his footsteps, and the ceiling was made of mirrors so that he could see himself standing on his head. And at each window stood 3 clerks and an alderman, writing down every word that was spoken, so that it immediately could be printed in the newspapers and sold for 2 pennies on the street corners. It was a terrible ordeal, and besides, there were such fires in the stoves that the pipe was red hot. "It's terribly hot in here," said the suitor. "That's because my father is roasting chickens today," said the princess. "Bah!" There he stood. He was not ready for a speech of this kind, and hadn't a word to say, just when he wanted to say something extremely witty. "Bah! No good," said the princess. "Take him away." And consequently, he had to leave. Now the second brother approached. "It's dreadfully warm here," he said. "Yes, we're roasting chickens today," replied the princess. What did you, what?" he stammered, and all the clerks carefully wrote down. What did you, what?" "No good," said the princess again. "Out with him." Now it was Clumsy Hans's turn, and he rode his billy goat right into the hall. "Terribly hot in here," he said. "I'm roasting young chickens," replied the princess. "Why, that's fine," said Clumsy Hans. "Then I suppose I can get my crow roasted?" "That you can," said the princess. "But have you anything to roast it in? I haven't any pots or pans." "But I have," replied Clumsy Hans. "Here's a cooking pot with a tin handle." Then he pulled out the old wooden shoe and put the crow right into it. "Why, that's enough for a whole meal," said the princess. "But where do we get the sauce from?" "I have that in my pocket," replied Clumsy Hans. "In fact, I have so much I can afford to spill some of it." Then he poured a little of the mud from his pocket. "I like that," said the princess. "You have an answer for everything, and you know how to speak. I'll take you for my husband. But do you know that everything we've said and are saying is written down and will be published in the paper tomorrow? Look over there, and you'll see in each window 3 clerks and an old alderman. And that alderman is the worst of all. He doesn't understand anything." She said this only to frighten him, but all the clerks chuckled with delight and spurted blots of ink on the floor. "Oh, so these are the gentlemen," said Clumsy Hans. "Then I must give the alderman the best thing I have." Then he turned out his pockets and threw the wet mud in the face of the alderman. "Cleverly done," said the princess. "I could never have done that, but I'll learn in time." So Clumsy Hans was made a king, with a wife and a crown, and sat on a throne. And we had this story straight from the alderman's newspaper, but that is one you can't always depend upon. The Metal Pig. In the city of Florence, not far from the Piazza del Granduca, runs a little street called Porta Rosa. In this street, just in front of the marketplace where vegetables are sold, stands a pig made of brass and curiously formed. The bright color has been changed by age to dark green, but clear, fresh water pours from the snout, which shines as if it had been polished. And so indeed it has, for hundreds of poor people and children seize it in their hands as they place their mouths close to the mouth of the animal to drink. It is quite a picture to see a half-naked boy clasping the well-formed creature by the head as he presses his rosy lips against its jaws. Everyone who visits Florence can very quickly find the place. He has only to ask the first beggar he meets for the metal pig, and he will be told where it is. It was late on a winter evening. The mountains were covered with snow, but the moon shone brightly, and moonlight in Italy is like a dull winter's day in the north. Indeed, it is better, for clear air seems to raise us above the earth, while in the north a cold, gray, leaden sky appears to press us down to earth, even as the cold, damp earth shall one day press on us in the grave. In the garden of the Grand Duke's palace, under the roof of one of the wings, where 1,000 roses bloom in winter, a little ragged boy had been sitting the whole day long. A boy who might serve as a type of Italy, lovely and smiling, and yet still suffering. He was hungry and thirsty, yet no one gave him anything. And when it became dark and they were about to close the gardens, the porter turned him out. He stood a long time musing on the bridge which crosses the Arno, and looking at the glittering stars reflected in the water which flowed between him and the elegant marble bridge della Trinita. He then walked away towards the metal pig, half knelt down, clasped it with his arms, and then put his mouth to the shining snout and drank deep draughts of the fresh water. Close by lay a few salad leaves and 2 chestnuts, which were to serve for his supper. No one was in the street but himself. It belonged only to him. So he boldly seated himself on the pig's back, leaned forward so that his curly head could rest on the head of the animal. And before he was aware, he fell asleep. It was midnight. The metal pig raised himself gently, and the boy heard him say quite distinctly, "Hold tight, little boy, for I am going to run." And away he started for a most wonderful ride. First, they arrived at the Piazza del Granduca, and the metal horse which bears the Duke's statue neighed aloud. The painted coats of arms on the old council house shone like transparent pictures, and Michelangelo's David tossed his sling. It was as if everything had life. The metallic groups of figures, among which were Perseus and the rape of the Sabines, looked like living persons, and cries of terror sounded from them all across the noble square. By the Palazzo degli Uffizi, in the arcade where the nobility assemble for the carnival, the metal pig stopped. "Hold fast," said the animal. "Hold fast, for I am going upstairs." The little boy said not a word. He was half pleased and half afraid. They entered a long gallery where the boy had been before. The walls were resplendent with paintings. Here stood statues and busts, all in a clear light, as if it were day. But the grandest appeared when the door of a side room opened. The little boy could remember what beautiful things he had seen there. But tonight, everything shone in its brightest colors. Here stood the figure of a beautiful woman, as beautifully sculptured as possible by one of the great masters. Her graceful limbs appeared to move. Dolphins sprang at her feet, and immortality shone from her eyes. The world called her the Venus de Medici. By her side were statues in which the spirit of life breathed in stone. Figures of men, one of whom whetted his sword and was named the Grinder. Wrestling gladiators formed another group. The sword had been sharpened for them, and they strove for the goddess of beauty. The boy was dazzled by so much glitter, for the walls were gleaming with bright colors. All appeared living reality. As they passed from hall to hall, beauty everywhere showed itself. And as the metal pig went step by step from one picture to the other, the little boy could see it all plainly. One glory eclipsed another, yet there was one picture that fixed itself on the little boy's memory, more especially because of the happy children it represented. For these, the little boy had seen in daylight. Many pass this picture by with indifference, and yet it contains a treasure of poetic feeling. It represents Christ descending into Hades. They are not the lost whom the spectator sees, but the heathen of olden times. The Florentine Angiolo Bronzino painted this picture. Most beautiful is the expression on the face of the two children, who appear to have full confidence that they shall reach heaven at last. They are embracing each other, and one little one stretches out his hand towards another who stands below him and points to himself, as if he were saying, "I am going to heaven." The older people stand as if uncertain, yet hopeful, and they bow in humble adoration to the Lord Jesus. On this picture, the boy's eyes rested longer than on any other. The metal pig stood still before it. A low sigh was heard. Did it come from the picture or from the animal? The boy raised his hands towards the smiling children, and then the pig ran off with him through the open vestibule. Thank you, you beautiful animal," said the little boy, caressing the metal pig as it ran down the steps. "Thanks to yourself also," replied the metal pig. "I have helped you, and you have helped me, for it is only when I have an innocent child on my back that I receive the power to run. Yes, as you see, I can even venture under the rays of the lamp in front of the picture of the Madonna, but I may not enter the church, still from without. And while you are upon my back, I may look in through the open door. Do not get down yet, for if you do, then I shall be lifeless, as you have seen me in the Porta Rossa. I will stay with you, my dear creature," said the little boy. So then they went on at a rapid pace through the streets of Florence till they came to the square before the church of Santa Croce. The folding doors flew open, and light streamed from the altar through the church into the deserted square. A wonderful blaze of light streamed from one of the monuments in the left side aisle, and 1,000 moving stars seemed to form a glory round it. Even the coat of arms on the tombstone shone, and a red ladder on a blue field gleamed like fire. It was the grave of Galileo. The monument is unadorned, but the red ladder is an emblem of art, signifying that the way to glory leads up a shining ladder on which the prophets of mind rise to heaven, like Elias of old. In the right aisle of the church, every statue on the richly carved sarcophagi seemed endowed with life. Here stood Michelangelo, there Dante, with the laurel wreath round his brow, Alfieri and Machiavelli. For here, side by side, rest the great men, the pride of Italy. The church itself is very beautiful, even more beautiful than the marble cathedral at Florence, though not so large. It seemed as if the carved vestments stirred, and as if the marble figures they covered raised their heads higher to gaze upon the brightly colored glowing altar where the white-robed boys swung the golden censers amid music and song, while the strong fragrance of incense filled the church and streamed forth into the square. The boy stretched forth his hands towards the light, and at the same moment the metal pig started again, so rapidly that he was obliged to cling tightly to him. The wind whistled in his ears. He heard the church door creak on its hinges as it closed, and it seemed to him as if he had lost his senses. Then a cold shudder passed over him, and he awoke. It was morning. The metal pig stood in its old place on the Porta Rossa, and the boy found he had slipped nearly off its back. Fear and trembling came upon him as he thought of his mother. She had sent him out the day before to get some money. He had not done so, and now he was hungry and thirsty. Once more he clasped the neck of his metal horse, kissed its nose, and nodded farewell to it. Then he wandered away into one of the narrowest streets, where there was scarcely room for a loaded donkey to pass. A great iron-bound door stood ajar. He passed through and climbed up a brick staircase with dirty walls and a rope for a balustrade, till he came to an open gallery hung with rags. From here, a flight of steps led down to a court, where from a well water was drawn up by iron rollers to the different stories of the house, and where the water buckets hung side by side. Sometimes the roller and the bucket danced in the air, splashing the water all over the court. Another broken-down staircase led from the gallery, and two Russian sailors running down it almost upset the poor boy. They were coming from their nightly carousal. A woman, not very young, with an unpleasant face and a quantity of black hair, followed them. "What have you brought home?" she asked when she saw the boy. "Don't be angry," he pleaded. "I received nothing. I have nothing at all." And he seized his mother's dress and would have kissed it. Then they went into a little room. I need not describe it, but only say that there stood in it an earthen pot with handles, made for holding fire, which in Italy is called a marito. This pot she took in her lap, warmed her fingers, and pushed the boy with her elbow. "Certainly, you must have some money," she said. The boy began to cry, and then she struck him with her foot till he cried out louder. "Will you be quiet, or I'll break your screaming head?" And she swung about the fire pot which she held in her hand, while the boy crouched to the earth and screamed. Then a neighbor came in, and she had also a marito under her arm. "Felicita," she said, "what are you doing to the child?" "The child is mine," she answered. "I can murder him if I like, and you too, Giannina." And then she swung about the fire pot. The other woman lifted up hers to defend herself, and the two pots clashed together so violently that they were dashed to pieces, and fire and ashes flew about the room. The boy rushed out at the sight, sped across the courtyard, and fled from the house. The poor child ran till he was quite out of breath. At last he stopped at the church, the doors of which were opened to him the night before, and went in. Here everything was bright, and the boy knelt down by the first tomb on his right, the grave of Michelangelo, and sobbed as if his heart would break. People came and went. Mass was performed, but no one noticed the boy, excepting an elderly citizen, who stood still and looked at him for a moment, and then went away like the rest. Hunger and thirst overpowered the child, and he became quite faint and ill. At last, he crept into a corner behind the marble monuments and went to sleep. Towards evening, he was awakened by a pull at his sleeve. He started up, and the same old citizen stood before him. "Are you ill? Where do you live? Have you been here all day?" were some of the questions asked by the old man. After hearing his answers, the old man took him home to a small house close by, in a back street. They entered a glovemaker's shop, where a woman sat sewing busily. A little white poodle, so closely shaven that his pink skin could plainly be seen, frisked about the room and gamboled upon the boy. "Innocent souls are soon intimate," said the woman, as she caressed both the boy and the dog. These good people gave the child food and drink, and said he should stay with them all night, and that the next day the old man, who was called Giuseppe, would go and speak to his mother. A little homely bed was prepared for him, but to him who had so often slept on the hard stones, it was a royal couch, and he slept sweetly and dreamed of the splendid pictures and of the metal pig. Giuseppe went out the next morning, and the poor child was not glad to see him go, for he knew that the old man was gone to his mother, and that perhaps he would have to go back. He wept at the thought, and then he played with the little lively dog and kissed it, while the old woman looked kindly at him to encourage him. And what news did Giuseppe bring back? At first the boy could not hear, for he talked a great deal to his wife, and she nodded and stroked the boy's cheek. Then she said, "He is a good lad. He shall stay with us. He may become a clever glovemaker, like you. Look what delicate fingers he has got. Madonna intended him for a glovemaker." So the boy stayed with them, and the woman herself taught him to sew. And he ate well, and slept well, and became very merry. But at last he began to tease Bellissima, as the little dog was called. This made the woman angry, and she scolded him and threatened him, which made him very unhappy. And he went and sat in his own room, full of sad thoughts. This chamber looked upon the street, in which hung skins to dry, and there were thick iron bars across his window. That night he lay awake, thinking of the metal pig. Indeed, it was always in his thoughts. Suddenly, he fancied he heard feet outside, going pit-a-pat. He sprung out of bed and went to the window. Could it be the metal pig? But there was nothing to be seen. Whatever he had heard had passed already. Next morning, their neighbor, the artist, passed by carrying a paint box and a large roll of canvas. "Help the gentleman to carry his box of colors," said the woman to the boy, and he obeyed instantly, took the box, and followed the painter. They walked on till they reached the picture gallery and mounted the same staircase up which he had ridden that night on the metal pig. He remembered all the statues and pictures, the beautiful marble Venus, and again he looked at the Madonna with the Savior and Saint John. They stopped before the picture by Bronzino, in which Christ is represented as standing in the lower world, with the children smiling before him in the sweet expectation of entering heaven. And the poor boy smiled too, for here was his heaven. "You may go home now," said the painter, while the boy stood watching him till he had set up his easel. "May I see you paint?" asked the boy. "May I see you put the picture on this white canvas?" "I am not going to paint yet," replied the artist. Then he brought out a piece of chalk. His hand moved quickly, and his eye measured the great picture, and though nothing appeared but a faint line, the figure of the Savior was as clearly visible as in the colored picture. "Why don't you go?" said the painter. Then the boy wandered home silently and seated himself on the table and learned to sew gloves. But all day long his thoughts were in the picture gallery, and so he pricked his fingers and was awkward. But he did not tease Bellissima. When evening came and the house door stood open, he slipped out. It was a bright, beautiful, starlight evening, but rather cold. Away he went through the already deserted streets, and soon came to the metal pig. He stooped down and kissed its shining nose, and then seated himself on its back. "You happy creature," he said, "how I have longed for you. We must take a ride tonight." But the metal pig lay motionless, while the fresh stream gushed forth from its mouth. The little boy still sat astride on its back. When he felt something pulling at his clothes, he looked down, and there was Bellissima, little smooth-shaven Bellissima, barking as if she would have said, "Here I am too. Why are you sitting there?" A fiery dragon could not have frightened the little boy so much as did the little dog in this place. Bellissima in the street, and not dressed, as the old lady called it. What would be the end of this? The dog never went out in winter, unless she was attired in a little lambskin coat, which had been made for her. It was fastened round the little dog's neck and body with red ribbons, and was decorated with rosettes and little bells. The dog looked almost like a little kid when she was allowed to go out in winter, and trot after her mistress. And now here she was in the cold, and not dressed. Oh, how would it end? All his fancies were quickly put to flight. Yet he kissed the metal pig once more, and then took Bellissima in his arms. The poor little thing trembled so with cold that the boy ran homeward as fast as he could. "What are you running away with there?" asked two of the police whom he met, and at whom the dog barked. "Where have you stolen that pretty dog?" they asked, and they took it away from him. "Oh, I have not stolen it. Do give it to me back again," cried the boy despairingly. "If you have not stolen it, you may say at home that they can send to the watch house for the dog." Then they told him where the watch house was, and went away with Bellissima. Here was a dreadful trouble. The boy did not know whether he had better jump into the Arno or go home and confess everything. They would certainly kill him, he thought. "Well, I would gladly be killed," he reasoned, "for then I shall die and go to heaven." And so he went home, almost hoping for death. The door was locked, and he could not reach the knocker. No one was in the street, so he took up a stone, and with it made a tremendous noise at the door. "Who is there?" asked somebody from within. "It is I," said he. "Bellissima is gone. Open the door, and then kill me." Then, indeed, there was a great panic. Madame was so very fond of Bellissima, she immediately looked at the wall where the dog's dress usually hung, and there was the little lamb skin. "Bellissima in the watch house," she cried. "You bad boy! How did you entice her out? Poor little delicate thing with those rough policemen. And she'll be frozen with cold." Giuseppe went off at once, while his wife lamented, and the boy wept. Several of the neighbors came in, and amongst them the painter. He took the boy between his knees and questioned him, and in broken sentences he soon heard the whole story, and also about the metal pig, and the wonderful ride to the picture gallery, which was certainly rather incomprehensible. The painter, however, consoled the little fellow, and tried to soften the lady's anger, but she would not be pacified till her husband returned with Bellissima, who had been with the police. Then there was great rejoicing, and the painter caressed the boy and gave him a number of pictures. Oh, what beautiful pictures these were! Figures with funny heads. And above all, the metal pig was there too. Oh, nothing could be more delightful. By means of a few strokes, it was made to appear on the paper, and even the house that stood behind it had been sketched in. Oh, if he could only draw and paint. He who could do this could conjure all the world before him. The first leisure moment during the next day, the boy got a pencil, and on the back of one of the other drawings, he attempted to copy the drawing of the metal pig, and he succeeded. Certainly, it was rather crooked, rather up and down, one leg thick and another thin. Still, it was like the copy, and he was overjoyed at what he had done. The pencil would not go quite as it ought. He had found that out, but the next day he tried again. A second pig was drawn by the side of the first, and this looked 100 times better. And the third attempt was so good that everybody might know what it was meant to represent. And now the glove-making went on, but slowly. The orders given by the shops in the town were not finished quickly, for the metal pig had taught the boy that all objects may be drawn upon paper. And Florence is a picture book in itself for anyone who chooses to turn over its pages. On the Piazza della Trinità stands a slender pillar, and upon it is the goddess of justice, blindfolded, with her scales in her hand. She was soon represented on paper, and it was the glove-maker's boy who placed her there. His collection of pictures increased, but as yet they were only copies of lifeless objects, when one day Bellissima came gambolling before him. "Stand still," cried he, "and I will draw you beautifully to put amongst my collection." But Bellissima would not stand still, so she must be bound fast in one position. He tied her head and tail, but she barked and jumped, and so pulled and tightened the string that she was nearly strangled. And just then her mistress walked in. "You wicked boy, the poor little creature," was all she could utter. She pushed the boy from her, thrust him away with her foot, called him a most ungrateful, good-for-nothing, wicked boy, and forbade him to enter the house again. Then she wept and kissed her little half-strangled Bellissima. At this moment, the painter entered the room. In the year 1834, there was an exhibition in the Academy of Arts at Florence. Two pictures, placed side by side, attracted a large number of spectators. The smaller of the two represented a little boy sitting at a table, drawing. Before him was a little white poodle, curiously shaven. But as the animal would not stand still, it had been fastened with a string to its head and tail to keep it in one position. The truthfulness and life in this picture interested everyone. The painter was said to be a young Florentine who had been found in the streets when a child by an old glove maker who had brought him up. The boy had taught himself to draw. It was also said that a young artist, now famous, had discovered talent in the child just as he was about to be sent away for having tied up Madame's favorite little dog and using it as a model. The glovemaker's boy had also become a great painter, as the picture proved, but the larger picture by its side was a still greater proof of his talent. It represented a handsome boy, clothed in rags, lying asleep, and leaning against the metal pig in the street of the Porta Rossa. all the spectators knew the spot well. The child's arms were round the neck of the pig, and he was in a deep sleep. The lamp before the picture of the Madonna threw a strong, effective light on the pale, delicate face of the child. It was a beautiful picture. A large gilt frame surrounded it, and on one corner of the frame a laurel wreath had been hung. But a black band twined unseen among the green leaves, and a streamer of crape hung down from it. For within the last few days, the young artist had died. The puppet show man. On board a steamer, I once met an elderly man with such a merry face that, if it was really an Inda of his mind, he must have been the happiest fellow in creation. And indeed, he considered himself so, for I heard it from his own mouth. He was a Dane, the owner of a traveling theater. He had all his company with him in a large box, for he was the proprietor of a puppet show. His inborn cheerfulness, he said, had been tested by a member of the Polytechnic institution, and the experiment had made him completely happy. I did not at first understand all this, but afterwards he explained the whole story to me. And here it is. I was giving a representation, he said, in the hall of the posting house in the little town of Skewer. There was a splendid audience, entirely juvenile, excepting 2 respectable matrons. All at once, a person in black, of student-like appearance, entered the room and sat down. He laughed aloud at the telling points and applauded quite at the proper time. This was a very unusual spectator for me, and I felt anxious to know who he was. I heard that he was a member of the Polytechnic institution in Copenhagen, who had been sent out to lecture to the people in the provinces. Punctually, at 8 o'clock, my performance closed, for children must go early to bed, and a manager must also consult the convenience of the public. At 9 o'clock, the lecturer commenced his lecture and his experiments, and then I formed a part of his audience. It was wonderful both to hear and to see. The greater part of it was beyond my comprehension, but it led me to think that if we men can acquire so much, we must surely be intended to last longer than the little span which extends only to the time when we are hidden away under the earth. His experiments were quite miracles on a small scale, and yet the explanations flowed as naturally as water from his lips. At the time of Moses and the prophets, such a man would have been placed among the sages of the land. In the Middle Ages, they would have burnt him at the stake. All night long, I could not sleep, and the next evening, when I gave another performance and the lecturer was present, I was in one of my best moods. I once heard of an actor who, when he had to act the part of a lover, always thought of one particular lady in the audience. He only played for her and forgot all the rest of the house. And now The Polytechnic lecturer was my she, my only auditor, for whom alone I played. When the performance was over, and the puppets removed behind the curtain, the Polytechnic lecturer invited me into his room to take a glass of wine. He talked of my comedies, and I of his science, and I believe we were both equally pleased. But I had the best of it, for there was much in what he did that he could not always explain to me. For instance, why a piece of iron which is rubbed on a cylinder should become magnetic. How does this happen? The magnetic sparks come to it. But how? It is the same with people in the world. They are rubbed about on this spherical globe till the electric spark comes upon them. And then we have a Napoleon, or a Luther, or someone of the kind. The whole world is but a series of miracles, said the lecturer, but we are so accustomed to them that we call them everyday matters. And he went on explaining things to me till my skull seemed lifted from my brain. And I declared that were I not such an old fellow, I would at once become a member of the Polytechnic institution, that I might learn to look at the bright side of everything, although I was one of the happiest of men. One of the happiest, said the lecturer, as if the idea pleased him. Are you really happy? Yes, I replied, for I am welcomed in every town when I arrive with my company. But I certainly have one wish which sometimes weighs upon my cheerful temper like a mountain of lead. I should like to become the manager of a real theater and the director of a real troupe of men and women. I understand, he said. You would like to have life breathed into your puppets so that they might be living actors, and you their director. And would you then be quite happy? I said I believed so, but he did not, and we talked it over in all manner of ways, yet could not agree on the subject. However, the wine was excellent, and we clanked our glasses together as we drank. There must have been magic in it, or I should most certainly become tipsy. But that did not happen, for my mind seemed quite clear, and indeed, a kind of sunshine filled the room and beamed from the eyes of the Polytechnic lecturer. It made me think of the old stories when the gods, in their immortal youth, wandered upon this earth and paid visits to mankind. I said so to him, and he smiled, and I could have sworn that he was one of these ancient deities in disguise, or, at all events, that he belonged to the race of the gods. The result seemed to prove I was right in my suspicions, for it was arranged that my highest wish should be granted, that my puppets were to be gifted with life, and that I was to be the manager of a real company. We drank to my success and clanked our glasses. Then he packed all my dolls into the box and fastened it on my back. and I felt as if I were spinning round in a circle, and presently found myself lying on the floor. I remember that quite well. And then the whole company sprang from the box. The spirit had come upon us all. The puppets had become distinguished actors, at least so they said themselves, and I was their director. When all was ready for the first representation, the whole company requested permission to speak to me before appearing in public. The dancing lady said the house could not be supported unless she stood on one leg, for she was a great genius, and begged to be treated as such. The lady who acted the part of the queen expected to be treated as a queen off the stage, as well as on it, or else, she said, she should get out of practice. The man whose duty it was to deliver a letter gave himself as many airs as he who took the part of first lover in the piece. He declared that the inferior parts were as important as the great ones, and deserving equal consideration, as parts of an artistic whole. The hero of the piece would only play in a part containing points likely to bring down the applause of the house. The prima donna would only act when the lights were red, for she declared that a blue light did not suit her complexion. It was like a company of flies in a bottle, and I was in the bottle with them, for I was their director. My breath was taken away, my head whirled, and I was as miserable as a man could be. It was quite a novel, strange set of beings among whom I now found myself. I only wished I had them all in my box again, and that I had never been their director. So I told them roundly that, after all, they were nothing but puppets. And then they killed me. After a while, I found myself lying on my bed in my room. But how I got there, or how I got away at all from the Polytechnic professor, he may perhaps know. I don't. The moon shone upon the floor, the box lay open, and the dolls were all scattered about in great confusion. But I was not idle. I jumped off the bed, and into the box they all had to go, some on their heads, some on their feet. Then I shut down the lid and seated myself upon the box. "Now you'll have to stay," said I, "and I shall be cautious how I wish you flesh and blood again." I felt quite light. My cheerfulness had returned, and I was the happiest of mortals. The Polytechnic professor had fully cured me. I was as happy as a king, and went to sleep on the box. Next morning, correctly speaking, it was noon, for I slept remarkably late that day. I found myself still sitting there, in happy consciousness that my former wish had been a foolish one. I inquired for the Polytechnic professor, but he had disappeared like the Greek and Roman gods. From that time, I have been the happiest man in the world. I am a happy director, for none of my company ever grumble, nor the public either, for I always make them merry. I can arrange my pieces just as I please. I choose out of every comedy what I like best, and no one is offended. Plays that are neglected nowadays by the great public were ran after 30 years ago and listened to till the tears ran down the cheeks of the audience. These are the pieces I bring forward. I place them before the little ones, who cry over them as Papa and Mama used to cry 30 years ago. But I make them shorter, for the youngsters don't like long speeches, and if they have anything mournful, they like it to be over quickly. There is a difference. It was in the month of May. The wind was still cold, but spring had come, said the trees and the bushes, the fields and the meadows. Everywhere flowers were budding into blossom. Even the hedges were alive with them. Here, spring spoke about herself. It spoke from a little apple tree, from which hung a single branch so fresh and blooming, and fairly weighed down by a glorious mass of rosy buds just ready to open. Now this branch knew how lovely it was, for that knowledge lies in the leaf as well as in the flesh. So it wasn't a bit surprised when one day a grand carriage stopped in the road beside it, and the young countess in the carriage said that this apple branch was the most beautiful she had ever seen. It was spring itself in its loveliest form. So she broke off the apple branch and carried it in her own dainty hand, shading it from the sun with her silk parasol, as they drove on to her castle, in which there were lofty halls and beautifully decorated rooms. Fleecy white curtains fluttered at its open windows, and there were many shining, transparent vases full of beautiful flowers. In one of these vases, which looked as if it were carved of new fallen snow, she placed the apple branch among fresh, green beech leaves, a lovely sight indeed. And so it happened that the apple branch grew proud. And that's quite human. All sorts of people passed through the rooms, and according to their rank, expressed their admiration in different ways. Some said too much, some said too little, and some said nothing at all. And the apple branch began to realize that there were differences in people as well as in plants. Some are used for nourishment, some are for ornament, and some you could very well do without, thought the apple branch. From its position at the open window, the apple branch could look down over the gardens and meadows below, and consider the differences among the flowers and plants beneath. Some were rich, some were poor, and some were very poor. Miserable, rejected plants, said the apple branch. There is a difference indeed. It's quite proper, and just that distinctions should be made. Yet how unhappy they must feel if indeed a creature like that is capable of feeling anything, as I and my equals do. But it must be that way, otherwise everybody would be treated as though they were just alike. And the apple branch looked down with especial pity on one kind of flower that grew everywhere in meadows and ditches. They were much too common ever to be gathered into bouquets. They could be found between the paving stones. They shot up like the rankest and most worthless of weeds. They were dandelions, but people have given them the ugly name, the devil's milk pails. "Poor wretched outcasts," said the apple branch. "I suppose you can't help being as common as you are and having such a vulgar name. It's the same with plants as with men. There must be a difference." "A difference?" repeated the sunbeam as it kissed the apple branch, but it kissed the golden devil's milk pails too. And all the other sunbeams did the same, kissing all the flowers equally, poor as well as rich. The apple branch had never thought about our Lord's infinite love for everything that lives and moves in him, had never thought how much that it is good and beautiful can lie hidden, but still not be forgotten. And that, too, was human. But the sunbeam, the ray of light, knew better. "You don't see very clearly. You are not very far-sighted. Who are these outcast flowers that you pity so much? Those devil's milk pails down there," replied the apple branch. "Nobody ever ties them up in bouquets. They're trodden underfoot because there are too many of them. And when they go to seed, they fly about along the road like little bits of wool and hang on people's clothes. They're just weeds. I suppose there must be weeds too, but I'm certainly happy and grateful that I'm not like one of them." Now a whole flock of children ran out into the meadow to play. The youngest of them was so tiny that he had to be carried by the others. When they set him down in the grass among the golden blossoms, he laughed and gurgled with joy, kicked his little legs, rolled over and over, and plucked only the yellow dandelions. These he kissed in innocent delight. The bigger children broke off the flowers of the dandelions and joined the hollow stalks, link by link, into chains. First, they would make one for a necklace, then a longer one to hang across the shoulders and around the waist, and finally, one to go around their heads. It was a beautiful wreath of splendid green links and chains, but the biggest of the children carefully gathered the stalks that had gone to seed, those loose, aerial, woolly blossoms, those wonderfully perfect balls of dainty white plumes, and held them to their lips, trying to blow away all the white feathers with one breath. Granny had told them that whoever could do that would receive new clothes before the year was out. The poor, despised dandelion was considered quite a prophet on such occasions. "Now do you see?" asked the sunbeam. "Do you see its beauty and power?" "Oh, it's all right for children," replied the apple branch. Now, an old woman came into the meadow. She stooped and dug up the roots of the dandelion with a blunt knife that had lost its handle. Some of the roots she would roast instead of coffee berries. Others she would sell to the apothecary to be used as drugs. "Beauty is something higher than this," said the apple branch. "Only the chosen few can really be allowed into the kingdom of the beautiful. There's as much difference between plants as between men." Then the sunbeam spoke of the infinite love of the Creator for all his creatures, for everything that has life, and of the equal distribution of all things in time and eternity. "That's just your opinion," replied the apple branch. Now, some people came into the room, and among them was the young countess who had placed the apple branch in the transparent vase. She was carrying a flower, or whatever it was, that was protected by 3 or 4 large leaves around it, like a cap, so that no breath of air or gust of wind could injure it. She carried it more carefully and tenderly than she had the apple branch when she had brought it to the castle. Very gently, she removed the leaves, and then the apple branch could see what she carried. It was a delicate, feathery crown of starry seeds borne by the despised dandelion. This was what she had plucked so carefully and carried so tenderly, so that no single one of the loose, dainty, feathered arrows that rounded out its downy form should be blown away. There it was, whole and perfect. With delight, she admired the beautiful form, the airy lightness, the marvelous mechanism of a thing that was destined so soon to be scattered by the wind. "Look how wonderfully beautiful our Lord made this," she cried. "I'll paint it together with the apple branch. Everybody thinks it is so extremely beautiful, but this poor flower is lovely too. It has received as much from our Lord in another way. They are very different, yet both are children in the kingdom of the beautiful." The sunbeam kissed the poor dandelion, and then kissed the blooming apple branch, whose petals seemed to blush a deeper red. Chicken, Grethe's family. Chicken, Grethe, was the only human tenant of the fine new house that was built for the hens and ducks on the estate. It was built where the old baronial castle had stood with its tower, crow's perch gable, moat, and drawbridge. Close by was a complete wilderness of trees and bushes. This had been the garden, running down to a big lake, which was now a marsh. Rooks, crows, and jackdaws, a whole horde of screeching, cawing birds, hovered over the trees. The flock did not seem to diminish, but rather to increase when one fired among them. They could be heard even inside the poultry house, where chicken Grethe sat with the ducklings, waddling about her wooden shoes. She knew each chicken and every duck from the moment it hatched. She took pride in her chickens and her ducks, and in the fine house that had been built for them. Her little room was clean and tidy. Her mistress, who owned the chicken house, insisted upon neatness, for she frequently brought distinguished visitors to see the barracks of her hens and ducks, as she called the place. She had a rocking chair and a wardrobe, and even a chest of drawers on which stood a highly polished brass plate with the name Grube engraved on it. This was the name of the old noble family that had lived there in the days when the castle was standing. The brass plate had been found while they were digging the ground, and the parish clerk said that it had no value except as a relic. The clerk knew all about the place and the old days, for he was a scholar, and his table drawer was filled with manuscripts. He knew much about the old days, but perhaps the oldest crow knew more and jabbered it out in his own language, but that was crow talk, which the clerk did not understand. Learned though he was, toward the end of hot summer day, the mist would rise over the marsh until it looked as if there were a lake beyond the old trees, where the rooks, crows, and jackdaws lived. This was how it had looked when old Sir Grub had lived there, and the castle with its massive red walls was still standing. In those days, the dog's chain used to reach clear across the gateway. By way of the tower, one came to the stone-flagged passage that led to the living quarters. The windows were narrow, and the panes quite small, even in the great hall where they used to dance. But in the days of the last Grubbas, there had been no dancing for as far back as a man could remember, though an old kettle drum that had been used in the orchestra still remained in the hall. And there was also a curiously carved cupboard in which the rare flower bulbs were stored, for Lady Grub took pleasure in planting and in cultivating flowers and trees. Her husband preferred to hunt wild boars and wolves, and his little daughter, Marie, always rode with him. When she was no more than 5 years old, she sat proudly on horseback and gazed fearlessly about with her great dark eyes. She delighted in cracking her whip among the hounds, though her father would rather have seen her lash out among the peasant boys who came to stare at the gentry. The peasant, who lived in a clay hut near the castle, had a son named Soren, who was of the same age as the well-born little lady. He knew how to climb trees, and he had to bring bird nests down to her. The birds screamed as loud as they could scream, and one of the largest of them struck him so hard, right above his eye, that blood ran down. And they thought at first that he had lost an eye, but it had not been injured. Marie Grubba called him her Soren, a sign of high favor, which once served to protect even his father, poor John. When he had done something wrong one day, John was condemned to ride the wooden horse. This contrivance stood in the yard, with 4 poles for legs, and for its back a single small rail, which John had to straddle. Lest he ride it too comfortably, heavy bricks were tied to his feet. He made such agonized faces that little Soren wept and went down on his knees to beg Marie to have his father released. She instantly commanded that his father should be taken down. When she was not obeyed, Marie stamped her small feet on the flagstones and tugged at her father's coat sleeve until she tore it. She would have her way, and she got it. Soren's father was released. Lady Grub came to her, stroked her hair, and looked at her daughter with mild, approving eyes. But Marie did not understand why. She would go with the hounds, not with her mother, who went down through the garden to the lake, where the water lilies bloomed, and where the bulrushes swayed among the reeds. How charming, Lady Grub would say, as she admired this fresh, abundant growth. A then very rare tree, which she herself had planted, grew in her garden. A blood beech, it was called, a sort of dark moor among the other trees. So dark brown were its leaves. It needed plenty of sunlight, for in constant shade its leaves would turn green, like those of other trees, and thus lose their distinction. In her tall chestnut trees, in the shrubbery, and even the grass were many bird nests. The birds seemed to understand that they were safe here, where no one dared fire a gun. But little Marie came here with Soren, who, as we know, could climb, and she sent him to bring her down both the eggs and the downy little birds. The parent birds fluttered about in terror and anguish. Large and small, lapwings from the lawns, rooks, crows, and jackdaws from the tall trees, they screamed and shrieked, just as their progeny shriek today. "Children, what are you doing?" the gentlewoman cried. "What a wicked thing to do." Soren looked ashamed, and even the high-born young girl looked a little embarrassed. But then she said in an abrupt and sulky way, "My father lets me do this. Away, away." The black birds shrieked, and away they flew. But they came back the next day because they lived there. But the quiet gentlewoman did not live there much longer. The Lord called her away, and with him she was more at home than ever she was in this house. The church bells solemnly tolled as her body was carried to the church, and poor men's eyes grew dim, for she had shown them kindness. And now that she was gone, no one looked after her plants, so the garden went to rack and ruin. Sir Grub is a hard man, people would say. but young as she is, his daughter can handle him. He would laugh and let her have her will. She was 12 years old now, tall and well-built. She looked right through people with her great dark eyes, rode her horse like a man, and shot her gun like an experienced hunter. It came to pass that great men visited that district. They were as great can be. The young king with his half-brother and crony, Lord Ulrich Frederick Gildenlöwe. They came to hunt wild boar, and they planned to stay overnight at Sir Grubba's castle. At the table, when Gildenlöwe sat beside Marie, he took her about the neck and gave her a kiss, just as if they had been related. But she gave him a slap in the face and told him she could not stand him. This caused great laughter, as if it were a most pleasing sight. And maybe it was, because 5 years later, when Marie was 17, Gildenlöwe sent a messenger with a letter asking for her hand in marriage. That was something. "He is the highest and most gallant lord in the land," said Sir Grubba. "You cannot refuse him." "I don't like him much," Marie Grubba said. But she did not turn down the highest lord in the land, who sat next to the king. Her silver, woolens, and linens were sent by ship to Copenhagen. Marie made the trip overland in 10 days, but the ship with the dowry met with contrary winds, or no wind at all. It took 4 months to reach Copenhagen, and when it did get there, Lady Gildenlöwe had gone. "I'd sooner lie on sacks than in his silken bed," she said. "I'd sooner walk barefoot than ride in a carriage with him." Late on an evening in November, 2 women came riding into the town of Aarhus. They were Lady Gildenlöwe and her maid. They came from Vejle, where they had arrived by ship from Copenhagen. They rode up to Sir Grubba's townhouse. He was not at all pleased to see Marie. He gave her harsh words, but he did give her a bedroom. She got her beer broth for breakfast, but no good words to go with it. Her father's bad temper had turned against her, and she was not used to it. Her own temper was by no means mild. As one is spoken to, so one answers, and answer she did. Of her husband, she spoke with bitterness and hatred. She declared that she could not live with him. She was too honorable and virtuous for that. In this fashion, a year went by, most unpleasantly. Bitter words passed between father and daughter. That should not be. Bitter words bear bitter fruit. What would be the outcome? One day, her father said, "We cannot live under the same roof. You must move to our old castle. I would rather you bit off your tongue than spoke lies." So they parted. With her maid, she went to the old estate where she was born and bred, and where her mother, that pious gentlewoman, lay in the churchyard vault. An old cowherd lived in the castle, and that was all. Cobwebs, heavy and black with dirt, draped every room. The garden was not taken care of. Wild hops and other climbing vines wove a tangled web between trees and shrubbery. Hemlock and nettles grew tall and rank. The blood beech had been outgrown, and in the deep shade its leaves had turned as green as those of ordinary trees. Its glory was gone. Rooks, crows, and jackdaws flew in enormous flocks above the tall chestnuts. They shrieked and cawed as if they had great news to tell each other. Here she was again, the girl who ordered their eggs and babies to be stolen from their nests. The real thief, the one who had actually stolen them, was now climbing a leafless tree. He clung to the tall ship's mast and got his share of lashes with a rope's end if he didn't behave himself. All this was told in our own time by the parish clerk. He had pieced it together from books and letters, and it lay with many another manuscript hidden away in his table drawer. "Up and down is the way the world goes," said he. "It's a curious story to hear. We want to hear how it went with Marie Grubba, but we shall not lose track of Chicken Grethe, who sat there in her fine hen house in our own day. Marie Grub sat in this place in her day, but not so contentedly as old Chicken Grethe. Winter went by, spring and summer passed, and again came the stormy autumn with its cold and wet fog. It was a dull and dreary life there on the old estate. Marie Grubba would snatch up her gun and go out on the heath to shoot hares or foxes and whatever birds she could find. More than once on these excursions, she encountered a nobleman, Sir Palle Dyer from Norabeek, with his gun and his dogs. He was a big man who enjoyed boasting of his strength when he talked with her. He might have been a match for the departed Mr. Brockenhuis of Edgeskov at Fian, whom people still remember as a man of might. Like him, Palle Dyer had fastened a hunting horn to an iron chain over his gateway. When he came home, he would catch hold of the chain, lift himself and his horse clear off the ground, and sound the horn. "You must come to my castle and see that, Lady Marie," he said, "for we have fine, fresh air at Norabeek." We have no record of when she went to Norabeek, but on the candlesticks at Norabeek Church, it is inscribed that they were given by Palle Dyer and Marie Grubba of Norabeek Castle. Body and strength had Palle Dyer. He could drink like a sponge. He was like a cask that could never be filled. He snored enough for a whole pig pen, and he looked red and bloated. "A cunning swine and a nagging fool he is," said Lady Palle Dyer, the daughter of Grubba, she soon grew weary of the life there, which did not improve matters. At dinner time one day, the food got cold on the table. Palla Dyer was off fox hunting, and Lady Dyer could not be found. Palla Dyer came home at midnight. Lady Dyer came home neither by midnight nor by morning. She turned her back upon Nora Beck and rode away without a word of farewell. The weather was cloudy and wet. The wind was sharp, and the flock of black birds that croaked over her head were not as homeless as she. First, she rode south, almost to Germany. She turned a couple of gold rings with precious stones into ready money. She went east, and she went west, with no fixed goal. She was angry with everybody, and even with the good Lord himself, so sick was her mind. And soon her body was sick too. She could scarcely drag her feet along. The lapwing flew up from its tuft of grass when she stumbled upon it and fell. The bird screamed, as it always does, "You thief! You thief!" Yet she had never stolen her neighbor's goods, except for the bird's eggs and nestlings taken from the clumps of grass and the tall trees when she was a little girl. She thought of that now. From where she lay, she could see the sand dunes along the beach. Fishermen lived there, but she was too ill to crawl so far. The great white seagulls came screaming over her as the rooks, crows, and jackdaws screamed above the trees at home. The birds flew nearer and nearer until at last she thought they were black birds. But then everything went black before her eyes. When she opened her eyes again, she was being carried in the arms of a tall, strapping fellow. She looked straight into his bearded face and saw that he had a scar over one eye that appeared to divide the eyebrow in two. Sick as she was, he carried her to his ship, where he was abused by the shipmaster for bringing such a burden. The ship set sail next day. Marie Grubb sailed with it. She was not put ashore. Didn't she ever come back? Yes, but when and how? The parish clerk could tell about this too. It was not a tale which he had pieced together. He had the whole strange story from a reliable book, which we can get and read for ourselves. The Danish author, Ludvig Holberg, who has written so many books worth reading and so many gay comedies by which we get to know his time and its people, mentions Marie Grubbe in his letters, which tell how and in what part of the world he found her. This is well worth hearing, but we shall not lose track of Chicken Grethe, who sits so happy and comfortable in her imposing chicken house. The ship sailed off with Marie Grubbe. That was where we left off. Year upon year went by. The plague was raging in Copenhagen. That was in the year of 1711. The Queen of Denmark went to her German home. The king left his capital, and everyone who could made haste to leave. The students, even those who had free board and lodging, scurried out of the city. One of them, the last student left at what they called Borch's College, near the students' headquarters, made ready to go. At 2 o'clock in the morning, he started out, with his knapsack stuffed with more books and manuscripts than clothes. A raw, dank mist hung over the city. Not a soul was to be seen in the street through which he passed. All around him, the gates and doors were marked with the crosses, which showed that there people lay ill or had died of the plague. Even in broad and winding Meatmonger Street, as the street leading from the Round Tower to the King's Palace was called then, there was not a man to be seen. Suddenly, a large hearse came rumbling by. The driver cracked his whip to urge his horses into a gallop. For the wagon was crammed with to urge his horses into a gallop. For the wagon was crammed with corpses. The young student covered his face with his hands and breathed the fumes of strong spirits which he carried in a brass boxed sponge. From a grog shop in one of the streets came the sound of songs and forced laughter. Men were drinking the night away in an effort to forget that death stood at their door, beckoning to them to come with him and join the other dead men in the hearse. The student hurried on to Castle Bridge, where 2 small boats were moored. One of them was just about to cast off and quit the plague-ridden city. If the Lord spares out lives and the wind serves us, we shall sail to Grönsund on Falster, the captain said, and he asked the name of this student who wanted to go with them. Ludwig Holberg, the student said, and at that time it sounded like any other name. Now it resounds as one of Denmark's proudest names. But he was then only a young student and unknown. The boat slipped past the castle, and before daybreak they came to the open sea. A light breeze sprang up, and the sails filled. The student sat down with the wind in his face and fell asleep. And that wasn't exactly an advisable thing to do. On the 3rd morning, the boat was already at Falster. Do you know of anyone in this place with whom I can live cheaply? Holberg asked the captain. I believe you had best go to the ferryman's wife at Bora House, he said. If you want to be polite, call her Mother Sorensen Muller. But she may turn angry if you show her too much politeness. Her husband is under arrest for some crime or other, and she runs the ferry herself. What fists she has! The student shouldered his knapsack and went to the ferry house. The door was not locked, so he lifted the latch and entered a brick-floored room in which a large folding bed with a big furred cover was the most noticeable piece of furniture. A white hen, with her chickens around her, was tied to the bedstead. She had upset her drinking dish, and water ran across the floor. No one was there, or in the next room, except a little child who lay in a cradle. The ferry boat came back with only one person on board. Whether man or woman was hard to say. This person was wrapped in a great cloak, with a hood that covered the head. When the boat was docked, it was a woman who entered the room. She had an impressive air as she straightened up and looked at him. Two proud eyes were set under her dark brows. It was Mother Soren, the ferryman's wife, though rooks, crows, and jackdaws could scream out another name by which we would know her better. Glum she looked, and little enough she cared for talk. But it was settled that the student would stay and board with her for an undetermined time until things went well again in Copenhagen. Now and then, some honest fellows from the neighboring town dropped in at the ferry house. Among them were Frank, the cutler, and Sievert, the customs collector, who came to drink a mug of ale and to chat with the student. He was a thoughtful young man who knew what's what, as they said. He read Latin and Greek and was well posted in many fields of knowledge. The less one knows, the lighter his burden, said Mother Soren. One day when Holberg watched her wash clothes in strong lye and chop up knotty stumps for firewood, he told her, "You work too hard." "That's my business," she said. "Have you had to toil and slave this way ever since you were a child?" "Read the answer in my hands," she said, and showed him her two hands, small but strong and hard, with broken nails. "You know how to read. Read them." At Christmas time, there was a heavy snowfall. The cold made itself at home, and the winds blew as bitterly as if they were dashing acid in people's faces. Mother Soren didn't care. She flung on her cloak, drew up the hood, and went about her business. When the house grew dark early in the afternoon, she would throw pine knots on the fire and sit by it to darn her stockings, for she had no one to do it for her. As evening came on, she talked with the student more than she usually did. She spoke of her husband. By accident, he killed a captain from Dragar, and for this, they put him in chains and sentenced him to 3 years of hard labor on the King's Island. He is only an ordinary sailor, so the law must take its course, you know. The law applies to the upper classes too, Holberg said. Do you believe that? Mother Soren stared into the fire and then went on. Do you know the story of K. Lyka, who ordered one of his churches torn down? When Mads, The pastor thundered from the pulpit against this. He had Mads clapped in irons and thrown in prison. Then he appointed himself judge, found Mads guilty, condemned him, and had his head struck off. That was no accident. Yet Kaleika was never punished. He was within his right, according to the custom of his time, Holberg said. We have come a long way since then. Try to make fools believe you. Mother Soren got up and went into the next room, where Tosin, her little child, lay in the cradle. When she had tidied and aired the cradle, she made the student's bed. He had the big furred cover, for though he was born in Norway, he felt the cold more than she did. New Year's Day dawned clear and sunny. It was solid that the snowdrifts were hard enough for one to walk across them. The bells in the village were ringing for church, as student Holberg wrapped himself in his heavy cloak to set off for town. Rooks flew screeching over Bora House, and so did the crows and jackdaws. They made such a racket that you could scarcely hear the bells. Mother Soren stood outside, filling a brass kettle with snow to melt over the fire for drinking water. She gazed up at the dark swarm of birds and thought her own thoughts. Student Holberg went to church, and on his way back, he passed the house of Sivert, the customs collector. Sivert invited him in to warm himself from a bowl of mulled ale sweetened with syrup and ginger. They started to talk about Mother Soren, but the customs collector knew little about her. Indeed, there were few who did. She is not a native of Falster, he said, and she has probably seen better days. Her husband is a common sailor with a violent temper. He killed a captain on Draugr, and though he used to beat his wife, she always sticks up for him. I would never stand for that, said the customs collector's wife. I too come of better stock. My father wove stockings for the king. So naturally, you married one of the king's officers, Holberg said, with a bow to her husband. 12th night came, and Mother Soren lighted for Holberg a candle of the 3 kings, that is, 3 small tallow candles, which she herself had prepared. A candle for each man, said Holberg. Each man? She exclaimed, and looked at him hard. Each of the wise men from the east, Holberg said. Oh, that's how you meant it, she said, and sat in silence for a while. But on that evening of the 3 kings, he learned a great deal about her that he had not known. You are fond of the man you are wedded to, Holberg said. Yet people tell me he daily mistreated you. That concerns no one but me, Mother Soren declared. The blows would have done me good had they fallen when I was a child. Now they probably fall for my sins. I only know the good he has done me. She stood up straight. When I lay ill and weak among the sand dunes, and no one would come near me except perhaps the rooks, the crows, and the jackdaws, who came to pick at me, he carried me in his arms and got hard words for bringing such a find on board his ship. I do not come of sickly stock, so I recovered. All of us have our faults, and Soren has his. One must not judge the horse by his halter. With him, I have led a more pleasant life than I did with him whom they called the highest and most gallant one of all the king's men. I have been married to Governor Gildenlöve, half-brother to the king. Afterward, I took Paladire. Good or bad, each has his own way, and I have mine. That was a long story, and now you know it. Mother Soren went out of the room. So this was Marie Grubbe. So strangely does the ball of fortune turn. She did not live to see many more feasts of the Three Kings. Holberg wrote that she died in June 1716. But he did not write, for he did not know that when Mother Soren, as they called her, lay dead in Boar House, a flock of large black birds flew over the roof in silence. They did not scream, and it was as if they knew that at funerals one must be quiet. As soon as she was in her grave, the birds departed. But on that same evening, the birds were seen in enormous numbers over her old estate in Jutland. Rooks, crows, and jackdaws screamed to each other as if they had much to tell. Perhaps they croaked of him who robbed them of their eggs and young ones when he was a boy, the peasant boy who received an iron garter on the king's island, and also of the high-born young lady who died a fairy woman at Gronsund. Bra, bra, they croaked, and bra, bra, the whole tribe croaked when the old castle was torn down. And this they cry still, though there is nothing left to croak about, said the parish clerk when he told the story. The family died out, the castle was torn down, and where it stood, the new hen house now stands, with its gilded weathercock on the roof and chicken Grethe inside. There she sits, well satisfied with her cozy residence. For if she had not come here, she would have gone to the workhouse. The pigeons cooed above her, the turkeys clucked, and the ducks quacked around her. No one knew her, they said. She had no relatives. By an act of charity she came here, and children she had none. Nevertheless, she had ancestors, though she did not know of them, nor did the parish clerk, for all the manuscripts he had in his table drawer. But one of the old crows knew, and he told about it. From its mother and its grandmother, it had heard tell of Chicken Grethe's mother and grandmother, whom we know too. We know how, as a child, she rode over the drawbridge and looked about proudly, as if the whole world and all the bird nests in it belonged to her. We also saw her on the sand dunes, and last at the ferry house. Her granddaughter, last of her line, had come home again, where the old castle had stood, and where the wild birds croaked. But she sat among her tame fowls, known by them, and on friendly terms with them. Chicken Grethe had nothing more to wish for. She was happy to die, and old enough to die. "Grave, grave," the crows croaked, and Chicken Grethe was buried in a good grave. No one knows where it lies, except the old crow, if he isn't dead too. Now we know the story of the old castle, and of all Chicken Grethe's family. Soup from a sausage skewer. "We had such an excellent dinner yesterday," said an old mouse of the female sex to another who had not been present at the feast. "I sat number 21 below the Mouse King," which was not a bad place. Shall I tell you what we had? Everything was first rate. Moldy bread, tallow candle, and sausage. And then, when we had finished that course, the same came on all over again. It was as good as 2 feasts. We were very sociable, and there was as much joking and fun as if we had been all of one family circle. Nothing was left but the sausage skewers, and this formed a subject of conversation, till at last it turned to the proverb, "Soup from sausage skins," or, as the people in the neighboring country call it, soup from a sausage skewer. Everyone had heard the proverb, but no one had ever tasted the soup, much less prepared it. A capital toast was drunk to the inventor of the soup, and someone said he ought to be made a relieving officer to the poor. Was not that witty? Then the old Mouse King rose and promised that the young lady mouse, who should learn how best to prepare this much admired and savory soup, should be his queen, and a year and a day should be allowed for the purpose. "That was not at all a bad proposal," said the other mouse. "But how is the soup made?" "Ah, that is more than I can tell you." All the young lady mice were asking the same question. They wished very much to be queen, but they did not want to take the trouble of going out into the world to learn how to make soup, which was absolutely necessary to be done first. But it is not everyone who would care to leave her family or her happy corner by the fireside at home, even to be made queen. It is not always easy to find bacon and cheese rind in foreign lands every day, and it is not pleasant to have to endure hunger and be perhaps, after all, eaten up alive by the cat. Most probably, some such thoughts as these discouraged the majority from going out into the world to collect the required information. Only 4 mice gave notice that they were ready to set out on the journey. They were young and lively, but poor. Each of them wished to visit one of the 4 divisions of the world, so that it might be seen which was the most favored by fortune. Everyone took a sausage skewer as a traveler's staff, and to remind them of the object of their journey. They left home early in May, and none of them returned till the 1st of May in the following year, and then only 3 of them. Nothing was seen or heard of the 4th, although the day of decision was close at hand. Ah, yes, there is always some trouble mixed up with the greatest pleasure, said the Mouse King. But he gave orders that all the mice within a circle of many miles should be invited at once. They were to assemble in the kitchen, and the 3 traveled mice were to stand in a row before them, while a sausage skewer covered with crepe was to be stuck up instead of the missing mouse. No one dared to express an opinion until the king spoke and desired one of them to go on with her story. And now we shall hear what she said, what the first little mouse saw and heard on her travels. When I first went out into the world, said the little mouse, I fancied, as so many of my age do, that I already knew everything. But it was not so. It takes years to acquire great knowledge. I went at once to sea in a ship bound for the north. I had been told that the ship's cook must know how to prepare every dish at sea, and it is easy enough to do that with plenty of sides of bacon, and large tubs of salt meat, and moldy flour. There I found plenty of delicate food, but no opportunity for learning how to make soup from a sausage skewer. We sailed on for many days and nights. The ship rocked fearfully, and we did not escape without a wetting. As soon as we arrived at the port to which the ship was bound, I left it and went on shore at a place far towards the north. It is a wonderful thing to leave your own little corner at home, to hide yourself in a ship where there are sure to be some nice, snug corners for shelter. Then, suddenly, to find yourself thousands of miles away in a foreign land. I saw large, pathless forests of pine and birch trees, which smelt so strong that I sneezed and thought of sausage. There were great lakes, also, which looked as black as ink at a distance, but were quite clear when I came close to them. Large swans were floating upon them, and I thought at first they were only foam. They lay so still. But when I saw them walk and fly, I knew what they were directly. They belong to the goose species. One can see that by their walk. No one can attempt to disguise family descent. I kept with my own kind, and associated with the forest and field mice, who, however, knew very little, especially about what I wanted to know, and which had actually made me travel abroad. The idea that soup could be made from a sausage skewer was to them such an out-of-the-way, unlikely thought that it was repeated from one to another through the whole forest. They declared that the problem would never be solved, that the thing was an impossibility. How little I thought that in this place, on the very first night, I should be initiated into the manner of its preparation. It was the height of summer, which the mice told me was the reason that the forest smelt so strong, and that the herbs were so fragrant, and the lakes with the white swimming swans so dark, and yet so clear. On the margin of the wood, near to 3 or 4 houses, a pole as large as the mainmast of a ship had been erected, and from the summit hung wreaths of flowers and fluttering ribbons. It was the maypole. Lads and lasses danced round the pole and tried to outdo the violins of the musicians with their singing. They were as merry as ever at sunset and in the moonlight, but I took no part in the merrymaking. What has a little mouse to do with a maypole dance? I sat in the soft moss and held my sausage skewer tight. The moon threw its beams particularly on one spot where stood a tree covered with exceedingly fine moss. I may almost venture to say that it was as fine and soft as the fur of the Mouse King, but it was green, which is a color very agreeable to the eye. All at once, I saw the most charming little people marching towards me. They did not reach higher than my knee. They looked like human beings, but were better proportioned, and they called themselves elves. Their clothes were very delicate and fine, for they were made of the leaves of flowers, trimmed with the wings of flies and gnats, which had not a bad effect. By their manner, it appeared as if they were seeking for something, I knew not what, till at last one of them espied me and came towards me, and the foremost pointed to my sausage skewer and said, "There, that is just what we want. See, it is pointed at the top. Is it not capital?" And the longer he looked at my pilgrim's staff, the more delighted he became. "I will lend it to you," said I, "but not to keep." "Oh no, we won't keep it," they all cried. And then they seized the skewer, which I gave up to them, and danced with it to the spot where the delicate moss grew, and set it up in the middle of the green. They wanted a maypole, and the one they now had seemed cut out on purpose for them. Then they decorated it so beautifully that it was quite dazzling to look at. Little spiders spun golden threads around it, and then it was hung with fluttering veils and flags so delicately white that they glittered like snow in the moonshine. After that, they took colors from the butterfly's wing and sprinkled them over the white drapery, which gleamed as if covered with flowers and diamonds, so that I could not recognize my sausage skewer at all. Such a maypole had never been seen in all the world as this. Then came a great company of real elves. Nothing could be finer than their clothes, and they invited me to be present at the feast. But I was to keep at a certain distance, because I was too large for them. Then commenced such music that it sounded like 1,000 glass bells, and was so full and strong that I thought it must be the song of the swans. I fancied also that I heard the voices of the cuckoo and the blackbird, and it seemed at last as if the whole forest sent forth glorious melodies, the voices of children, the tinkling of bells, and the songs of the birds. And all this wonderful melody came from the elfin maypole. My sausage peg was a complete peal of bells. I could scarcely believe that so much could have been produced from it, till I remembered into what hands it had fallen. I was so much affected that I wept tears such as a little mouse can weep. But they were tears of joy. The night was far too short for me. There are no long nights there in summer, as we often have in this part of the world. When the morning dawned, and the gentle breeze rippled the glassy mirror of the forest lake, all the delicate veils and flags fluttered away into thin air. The waving garlands of the spider's web, the hanging bridges and galleries, or whatever else they may be called, vanished away as if they had never been. 6 elves brought me back my sausage skewer, and at the same time asked me to make any request, which they would grant if in their power. So I begged them, if they could, to tell me how to make soup from a sausage skewer. "How do we make it?" said the chief of the elves with a smile. "Why, you have just seen it. You scarcely knew your sausage skewer again, I am sure." They think themselves very wise, thought I to myself. Then I told them all about it, and why I had traveled so far, and also what promise had been made at home to the one who should discover the method of preparing this soup. "What use will it be," I asked, "to the Mouse King, or to our whole mighty kingdom, that I have seen all these beautiful things?" I cannot shake the sausage peg and say, "Look, here is the skewer, and now the soup will come." That would only produce a dish to be served when people were keeping a fast. Doh. Then the elf dipped his finger into the cup of a violet and said to me, "Look here, I will anoint your pilgrim's staff, so that when you return to your own home and enter the king's castle, you have only to touch the king with your staff, and violets will spring forth and cover the whole of it, even in the coldest winter time. So I think I have given you really something to carry home, and a little more than something." But before the little mouse explained what this something more was, she stretched her staff out to the king, and as it touched him, the most beautiful bunch of violets sprang forth and filled the place with perfume. The smell was so powerful that the Mouse King ordered the mice who stood nearest the chimney to thrust their tails into the fire, that there might be a smell of burning. for the perfume of the violets was overpowering, and not the sort of scent that everyone liked. But what was the something more of which you spoke just now? Asked the Mouse King. Why, answered the little mouse, I think it is what they call effect. And thereupon she turned the staff round, and behold, not a single flower was to be seen upon it. She now only held the naked skewer, and lifted it up as a conductor lifts his baton at a concert. Violets, the elf told me, continued the mouse, are for the sight, the smell, and the touch. So we have only now to produce the effect of hearing and tasting. And then, as the little mouse beat time with her staff, there came sounds of music. Not such music as was heard in the forest, at the elfin feast, but such as is often heard in the kitchen, the sounds of boiling and roasting. It came quite suddenly, like wind rushing through the chimneys, and seemed as if every pot and kettle were boiling over. The fire shovel clattered down on the brass fender, and then, quite as suddenly, all was still. Nothing could be heard but the light, vapory song of the tea kettle, which was quite wonderful to hear, for no one could rightly distinguish whether the kettle was just beginning to boil or going to stop. And the little pot steamed, and the great pot simmered, but without any regard for each. Indeed, there seemed no sense in the pots at all. And as the little mouse waved her baton still more wildly, the pots foamed and threw up bubbles and boiled over, while again the wind roared and whistled through the chimney. And at last there was such a terrible hubbub that the little mouse let her stick fall. That is a strange sort of soup, said the Mouse King. Shall we not now hear about the preparation? That is all, answered the little mouse with a bow. That all? Said the Mouse King. Then we shall be glad to hear what information the next may have to give us. What the second mouse had to tell, I was born in the library at a castle, said the second mouse. Very few members of our family ever had the good fortune to get into the dining room, much less the storeroom. On my journey, and here today, are the only times I have ever seen a kitchen. We were often obliged to suffer hunger in the library, but then we gained a great deal of knowledge. The rumor reached us of the royal prize offered to those who should be able to make soup from a sausage skewer. Then my old grandmother sought out a manuscript, which, however, she could not read, but had heard it read. And in it was written, "Those who are poets can make soup of sausage skewers." She then asked me if I was a poet. I felt myself quite innocent of any such pretensions. Then she said, I must go out and make myself a poet. I asked again what I should be required to do, for it seemed to me quite as difficult as to find out how to make soup of a sausage skewer. My grandmother had heard a great deal of reading in her day, and she told me 3 principal qualifications were necessary: understanding, imagination, and feeling. If you can manage to acquire these 3, you will be a poet, and the sausage skewer soup will be quite easy to you. So I went forth into the world and turned my steps towards the west, that I might become a poet. Understanding is the most important matter in everything. I knew that for the 2 other qualifications are not thought much of. So I went first to seek for understanding. Where was I to find it? Go to the ant and learn wisdom, said the great Jewish king. I knew that from living in a library. So I went straight on till I came to the first great ant hill. And then I set myself to watch, that I might become wise. The ants are a very respectable people. They are wisdom itself. All they do is like the working of a sum in arithmetic, which comes right to work and to lay eggs, say they, and to provide for posterity is to live out your time properly, and that they truly do. They are divided into the clean and the dirty ants. Their rank is pointed out by a number, and the ant queen is number 1, and her opinion is the only correct one on everything. She seems to have the whole wisdom of the world in her, which was just the important matter I wished to acquire. She said a great deal, which was no doubt very clever. Yet to me, it sounded like nonsense. She said the anthill was the loftiest thing in the world, and yet close to the mound stood a tall tree, which no one could deny was loftier, much loftier, but no mention was made of the tree. One evening, an ant lost herself on this tree. She had crept up the stem, not nearly to the top, but higher than any ant had ever ventured. And when at last she returned home, she said that she had found something in her travels much higher than the anthill. The rest of the ants considered this an insult to the whole community. So she was condemned to wear a muzzle and to live in perpetual solitude. A short time afterwards, another ant got on the tree and made the same journey and the same discovery. But she spoke of it cautiously and indefinitely, and as she was one of the superior ants and very much respected, they believed her. And when she died, they erected an eggshell as a monument to her memory, for they cultivated a great respect for science. I saw, said the little mouse, that the ants were always running to and fro with her burdens on their backs. Once, I saw one of them drop her load. She gave herself a great deal of trouble in trying to raise it again, but she could not succeed. Then 2 others came up and tried with all their strength to help her, till they nearly dropped their own burdens in doing so. Then they were obliged to stop for a moment in their help, for everyone must think of himself first, and the Ant Queen remarked that their conduct that day showed that they possessed kind hearts and good understanding. These two qualities, she continued, place us ants in the highest degree above all other reasonable beings. Understanding must therefore be seen among us in the most prominent manner, and my wisdom is greater than all. And so saying, she raised herself on her two hind legs, that no one else might be mistaken for her. I could not therefore make an error, so I ate her up. We are to go to the ants to learn wisdom, and I had got the queen. I now turned and went nearer to the lofty tree already mentioned, which was an oak. It had a tall trunk with a wide spreading top and was very old. I knew that a living being dwelt here, a dryad, as she is called, who is born with the tree and dies with it. I had heard this in the library, and here was just such a tree, and in it an oak maiden. She uttered a terrible scream when she caught sight of me so near to her. Like many women, she was very much afraid of mice, and she had more real cause for fear than they have, for I might have gnawed through the tree on which her life depended. I spoke to her in a kind and friendly manner, and begged her to take courage. At last she took me up in her delicate hand, and then I told her what had brought me out into the world, and she promised me that perhaps on that very evening she should be able to obtain for me one of the two treasures for which I was seeking. She told me that Phantasus was her very dear friend, that he was as beautiful as the god of love, that he remained often for many hours with her under the leafy boughs of the tree, which then rustled and waved more than ever over them both. He called her his dryad, she said, and the tree his tree, for the grand old oak with its gnarled trunk was just to his taste, the root spreading deep into the earth, the top rising high in the fresh air, knew the value of the drifted snow, the keen wind, and the warm sunshine, as it ought to be known. Yes, continued the dryad, the birds sing up above in the branches and talk to each other about the beautiful fields they have visited in foreign lands. And on one of the withered boughs, a stork has built his nest. It is beautifully arranged, and besides, it is pleasant to hear a little about the land of the pyramids. All this pleases Phantasus, but it is not enough for him. I am obliged to relate to him of my life in the woods, and to go back to my childhood, when I was little, and the tree so small and delicate that a stinging nettle could overshadow it. And I have to tell everything that has happened since then till now, that the tree is so large and strong. Sit you down now under the green bindwood, and pay attention. When Phantasis comes, I will find an opportunity to lay hold of his wing and to pull out one of the little feathers. That feather you shall have. A better was never given to any poet. It will be quite enough for you. And when Phantasis came, the feather was plucked. And, said the little mouse, I seized and put it in water and kept it there till it was quite soft. It was very heavy and indigestible, but I managed to nibble it up at last. It is not so easy to nibble oneself into a poet. There are so many things to get through. Now, however, I had two of them, understanding and imagination. And through these, I knew that the third was to be found in the library. A great man has said and written that there are novels whose sole and only use appeared to be that they might relieve mankind of overflowing tears. A kind of sponge, in fact, for sucking up feelings and emotions. I remembered a few of these books. They had always appeared tempting to the appetite. They had been much read, and were so greasy that they must have absorbed no end of emotions in themselves. I retraced my steps to the library and literally devoured a whole novel. That is, properly speaking, the interior or soft part of it. The crust or binding I left. When I had digested not only this, but a second, I felt a stirring within me. Then I ate a small piece of a third romance, and felt myself a poet. I said it to myself, and told others the same. I had headache and backache, and I cannot tell what aches besides. I thought over all the stories that may be said to be connected with sausage pegs, and all that has ever been written about skewers, and sticks, and staves, and splinters came to my thoughts. The Ant Queen must have had a wonderfully clear understanding. I remembered the man who placed a white stick in his mouth by which he could make himself and the stick invisible. I thought of sticks as hobby horses, staves of music or rhyme, of breaking a stick over a man's back. And heaven knows how many more phrases of the same sort relating to sticks, staves, and skewers. All my thoughts rain on skewers, sticks of wood, and staves. And as I am, at last, a poet, and I have worked terribly hard to make myself one, I can, of course, make poetry on anything. I shall therefore be able to wait upon you every day in the week with a poetical history of a skewer. And that is my soup. In that case, said the Mouse King, we will hear what the third mouse has to say. Squeak, squeak, cried a little mouse at the kitchen door. It was the fourth, and not the third, of the four who were contending for the prize, one whom the rest supposed to be dead. She shot in like an arrow. and overturned the sausage peg that had been covered with crepe. She had been running day and night. She had watched an opportunity to get into a goods train and had traveled by the railway. And yet she had arrived almost too late. She pressed forward, looking very much ruffled. She had lost her sausage skewer, but not her voice, for she began to speak at once as if they only waited for her and would hear her only, and as if nothing else in the world was of the least consequence. She spoke out so clearly and plainly, and she had come in so suddenly that no one had time to stop her or to say a word while she was speaking. And now let us hear what she said. What the fourth mouse, who spoke before the third, had to tell, I started off at once to the largest town, said she. But the name of it has escaped me. I have a very bad memory for names. I was carried from the railway with some forfeited goods to the jail, and on arriving, I made my escape and ran into the house of the turnkey. The turnkey was speaking of his prisoners, especially of one who had uttered thoughtless words. These words had given rise to other words, and at length they were written down and registered. The whole affair is like making soup of sausage skewers, said he, but the soup may cost him his neck. Now this raised in me an interest for the prisoner, continued the little mouse, and I watched my opportunity and slipped into his apartment, for there is a mouse hole to be found behind every closed door. The prisoner looked pale. He had a great beard and large, sparkling eyes. There was a lamp burning, but the walls were so black that they only looked the blacker for it. The prisoner scratched pictures and verses with white chalk on the black walls, but I did not read the verses. I think he found his confinement wearisome, so that I was a welcome guest. He enticed me with breadcrumbs, with whistling, and with gentle words, and seemed so friendly towards me that by degrees I gained confidence in him, and we became friends. He divided his bread and water with me, gave me cheese and sausage, and I really began to love him. Altogether, I must own that it was a very pleasant intimacy. He let me run about on his hand, and on his arm, and into his sleeve, and I even crept into his beard, and he called me his little friend. I forgot what I had come out into the world for, forgot my sausage skewer, which I had laid in a crack in the floor. It is lying there still. I wished to stay with him always where I was, for I knew that if I went away, the poor prisoner would have no one to be his friend, which is a sad thing. I stayed, but he did not. He spoke to me so mournfully for the last time, gave me double as much bread and cheese as usual, and kissed his hand to me. Then he went away, and and never came back. I know nothing more of his history. The jailer took possession of me now. He said something about soup from a sausage skewer, but I could not trust him. He took me in his hand, certainly, but it was to place me in a queue, like a treadmill. Oh, how dreadful it was. I had to run round and round without getting any farther in advance, and only to make everybody laugh. The jailer's granddaughter was a charming little thing. She had curly hair, like the brightest gold, merry eyes, and such a smiling mouth. "You poor little mouse," said she, one day, as she peeped into my cage. "I will set you free." She then drew forth the iron fastening, and I sprang out on the windowsill, and from thence to the roof. Free! Free! That was all I could think of, not of the object of my journey. It grew dark, and as night was coming on, I found a lodging in an old tower, where dwelt a watchman and an owl. I had no confidence in either of them, least of all in the owl, which is like a cat, and has a great failing, for she eats mice. One may, however, be mistaken sometimes, and so was I, for this was a respectable and well-educated old owl, who knew more than the watchman, and even as much as I did myself. The young owls made a great fuss about everything, but the only rough words she would say to them were, "Dua, you had better go and make some soup from sausage skewers." She was very indulgent and loving to her children. Her conduct gave me such confidence in her that from the crack where I sat, I called out, "Squeak." This confidence of mine pleased her so much that she assured me she would take me under her own protection, and that not a creature should do me harm. The fact was, she wickedly meant to keep me in reserve for her own eating in winter, when food would be scarce. Yet she was a very clever lady owl. She explained to me that the watchman could only hoot with the horn that hung loose at his side. And then she said he is so terribly proud of it that he imagines himself an owl in the tower, wants to do great things, but only succeeds in small. All soup on a sausage skewer. Then I begged the owl to give me the recipe for this soup. "Soup from a sausage skewer," said she, "is only a proverb amongst mankind, and may be understood in many ways. Each believes his own way the best, and after all, the proverb signifies nothing." "Nothing!" I exclaimed. I was quite struck. Truth is not always agreeable, but truth is above everything else, as the old owl said. I thought over all this, and saw quite plainly that if truth was really so far above everything else, it must be much more valuable than soup from a sausage skewer. So I hastened to get away, that I might be home in time, and bring what was highest and best, and above everything, namely, the truth. The mice are an enlightened people, and the Mouse King is above them all. He is therefore capable of making me queen for the sake of truth. Your truth is a falsehood, said the mouse, who had not yet spoken. I can prepare the soup, and I mean to do so. How it was prepared, I did not travel, said the third mouse. I stayed in this country. That was the right way. One gains nothing by traveling. Everything can be acquired here quite as easily, so I stayed at home. I have not obtained what I know from supernatural beings. I have neither swallowed it nor learnt it from conversing with owls. I have got it all from my reflections and thoughts. Will you now set the kettle on the fire? So, now pour the water in, quite full up to the brim. Place it on the fire. Make up a good blaze. Keep it burning, that the water may boil. It must boil over and over. There, now I throw in the skewer. Will the Mouse King be pleased now to dip his tail into the boiling water and stir it round with the tail? The longer the king stirs it, the stronger the soup will become. Nothing more is necessary, only to stir it. Can no one else do this? Asked the king. No, said the mouse. Only in the tail of the Mouse King is this power contained. And the water boiled and bubbled as the Mouse King stood close beside the kettle. It seemed rather a dangerous performance, but he turned round and put out his tail, as mice do in a dairy, when they wish to skim the cream from a pan of milk with their tails, and afterwards lick it off. But the Mouse King's tail had only just touched the hot steam when he sprang away from the chimney in a great hurry, exclaiming, "Oh, certainly, by all means, you must be my queen, and we will let the soup question rest till our golden wedding, 50 years hence, so that the poor in my kingdom, who are then to have plenty of food, will have something to look forward to for a long time, with great joy." And very soon the wedding took place. But many of the mice, as they were returning home, said that the soup could not be properly called soup from a sausage skewer, but soup from a mouse's tail. They acknowledged also that some of the stories were very well told, but that the whole could have been managed differently. I should have told it so, and so, and so. These were the critics, who are always so clever afterwards. When this story was circulated all over the world, the opinions upon it were divided, but the story remained the same, and after all, the best way in everything you undertake, great as well as small, is to expect no thanks for anything you may do, even when it refers to soup from a sausage skewer. What the old man does is always right. I will tell you a story that was told me when I was a little boy. Every time I thought of this story, it seemed to me more and more charming, for it is with stories, as it is with many people. They become better as they grow older. I have no doubt that you have been in the country and seen a very old farmhouse with a thatched roof and mosses and small plants growing wild upon it. There is a stork's nest on the ridge of the gable, for we cannot do without the stork. The walls of the house are sloping, and the windows are low, and only one of the latter is made to open. The baking oven sticks out of the wall like a great knob. An elder tree hangs over the palings, and beneath its branches, at the foot of the paling, is a pool of water, in which a few ducks are disporting themselves. There is a yard dog, too, who barks at all corners. Just such a farmhouse as this stood in a country lane, and in it dwelt an old couple, a peasant and his wife. Small as their possessions were, they had one article they could not do without, and that was a horse, which contrived to live upon the grass which it found by the side of the high road. The old peasant rode into the town upon this horse, and his neighbors often borrowed it of him, and paid for the loan of it by rendering some service to the old couple. After a time, they thought it would be as well to sell the horse, or exchange it for something which might be more useful to them. But what might this something be? "You'll know best, old man," said the wife. "It is fair day today, so ride into town and get rid of the horse for money, or make a good exchange. Whichever you do will be right to me, so ride to the fair." And she fastened his neckerchief for him, for she could do that better than he could, and she could also tie it very prettily in a double bow. She also smoothed his hat round and round with the palm of her hand, and gave him a kiss. Then he rode away upon the horse that was to be sold or bartered for something else. Yes, the old man knew what he was about. The sun shone with great heat, and not a cloud was to be seen in the sky. The road was very dusty, for a number of people, all going to the fair, were driving, riding, or walking upon it. There was no shelter anywhere from the hot sunshine. Among the rest, a man came trudging along and driving a cow to the fair. The cow was as beautiful a creature as any cow could be. "She gives good milk, I am certain," said the peasant to himself. "That would be a very good exchange, the cow for the horse. Hello there, you with the cow," he said. "I tell you what, I dare say a horse is of more value than a cow, but I don't care for that. A cow will be more useful to me. So, if you like, we'll exchange." "To be sure I will," said the man. Accordingly, the exchange was made, and as the matter was settled, the peasant might have turned back, for he had done the business he came to do. But having made up his mind to go to the fair, he determined to do so. if only to have a look at it. So on, he went to the town with his cow. Leading the animal, he strode on sturdily, and, after a short time, overtook a man who was driving a sheep. It was a good, fat sheep, with a fine fleece on its back. "I should like to have that fellow," said the peasant to himself. "There is plenty of grass for him by our palings, and in the winter we could keep him in the room with us. Perhaps it would be more profitable to have a sheep than a cow. Shall I exchange?" The man with the sheep was quite ready, and the bargain was quickly made. And then our peasant continued his way on the high road with his sheep. Soon after this, he overtook another man who had come into the road from a field and was carrying a large goose under his arm. "What a heavy creature you have there," said the peasant. "It has plenty of feathers and plenty of fat, and would look well tied to a string or paddling in the water at our place. That would be very useful to my old woman. She could make all sorts of profits out of it. How often she has said, 'If now we only had a goose!' Now here is an opportunity, and, if possible, I will get it for her. Shall we exchange? I will give you my sheep for your goose, and thanks into the bargain." The other had not the least objection, and accordingly the exchange was made, and our peasant became possessor of the goose. By this time, he had arrived very near the town. The crowd on the high road had been gradually increasing, and there was quite a rush of men and cattle. The cattle walked on the path and by the palings, and at the turnpike gate. They even walked into the toll-keeper's potato field, where one fowl was strutting about with a string tied to its leg, for fear it should take fright at the crowd and run away and get lost. The tail feathers of the fowl were very short, and it winked with both its eyes and looked very cunning as it said, "Cluck, cluck." What were the thoughts of the fowl as it said this, I cannot tell you. But directly our good man saw it, he thought, "Why, that's the finest fowl I ever saw in my life. It's finer than our parson's brood hen, upon my word. I should like to have that fowl. Fowls can always pick up a few grains that lie about, and almost keep themselves. I think it would be a good exchange if I could get it for my goose. Shall we exchange?" he asked the toll-keeper. "Exchange," repeated the man. "Well, it would not be a bad thing." And so they made an exchange. The toll-keeper at the turnpike gate kept the goose, and the peasant carried off the fowl. Now he had really done a great deal of business on his way to the fair, and he was hot and tired. He wanted something to eat, and a glass of ale to refresh himself. So he turned his steps to an inn. He was just about to enter when the ostler came out. and they met at the door. The ostler was carrying a sack. "What have you in that sack?" asked the peasant. "Rotten apples," answered the ostler. "A whole sackful of them. They will do to feed the pigs with." "Why, that will be terrible waste," he replied. "I should like to take them home to my old woman. Last year, the old apple tree by the grass plot only bore one apple, and we kept it in the cupboard till it was quite withered and rotten. It was always property, my old woman said, and here she would see a great deal of property, a whole sackful. I should like to show them to her." "What will you give me for the sackful?" asked the ostler. "What will I give?" "Well, I will give you my fowl in exchange." So he gave up the fowl and received the apples, which he carried into the inn parlor. He leaned the sack carefully against the stove and then went to the table. But the stove was hot, and he had not thought of that. Many guests were present, horse dealers, cattle drovers, and 2 Englishmen. The Englishmen were so rich that their pockets quite bulged out and seemed ready to burst. And they could bet too, as you shall hear. Hiss, sis, hiss, sis. What could that be by the stove? The apples were beginning to roast. "What is that?" asked one. "Why, do you know?" said our peasant. And then he told them the whole story of the horse, which he had exchanged for a cow, and all the rest of it, down to the apples. "Well, your old woman will give it you well when you get home," said one of the Englishmen. "Won't there be a noise?" "What? Give me what?" said the peasant. "Why, she will kiss me and say, 'What the old man does is always right.'" "Let us lay a wager on it," said the Englishman. "We'll wager you a ton of coined gold, 100 pounds to the 100 weight. "No, a bushel will be enough," replied the peasant. "I can only set a bushel of apples against it, and I'll throw myself and my old woman into the bargain. That will pile up the measure, I fancy." "Done. Taken." And so the bet was made. Then the landlord's coach came to the door, and the 2 Englishmen and the peasant got in, and away they drove, and soon arrived and stopped at the peasant's hut. "Good evening, old woman." "Good evening, old man." "I've made the exchange." "Ah, well, you understand what you're about," said the woman. Then she embraced him and paid no attention to the strangers, nor did she notice the sack. "I got a cow in exchange for the horse." "Thank heaven," said she. "Now we shall have plenty of milk and butter and cheese on the table." That was a capital exchange. "Yes, but I changed the cow for a sheep." "Ah, better still," cried the wife. "You always think of everything. We have just enough pasture for a sheep. Use milk and cheese, woolen jackets and stockings. The cow could not give all these, and her hair only falls off. How you think of everything. But I changed away the sheep for a goose. Then we shall have roast goose to eat this year. You dear old man, you are always thinking of something to please me. This is delightful. We can let the goose walk about with a string tied to her leg, so she will be fatter still before we roast her. But I gave away the goose for a fowl. A fowl? Well, that was a good exchange, replied the woman. The fowl will lay eggs and hatch them, and we shall have chickens. We shall soon have a poultry yard. Oh, this is just what I was wishing for. Yes, but I exchanged the fowl for a sack of shriveled apples. What? I really must give you a kiss for that, exclaimed the wife. My dear, good husband, now I'll tell you something. Do you know, almost as soon as you left me this morning, I began to think of what I could give you nice for supper this evening. And then I thought of fried eggs and bacon with sweet herbs. I had eggs and bacon, but I wanted the herbs, so I went over to the schoolmaster's. I knew they had plenty of herbs, but the schoolmistress is very mean, although she can smile so sweetly. I begged her to lend me a handful of herbs. Lend, she exclaimed. I have nothing to lend. Nothing at all grows in our garden, not even a shriveled apple. I could not even lend you a shriveled apple, my dear woman. But now I can lend her 10, or a whole sackful, which I'm very glad of. It makes me laugh to think about it. And then she gave him a hearty kiss. Well, I like all this, said both the Englishmen. Always going down the hill, and yet always merry. It's worth the money to see it. So they paid 100 weight of gold to the peasant, who, whatever he did, was not scolded, but kissed. Yes, it always pays best when the wife sees and maintains that her husband knows best, and whatever he does is right. That is a story which I heard when I was a child, and now you have heard it too, and know that what the old man does is always right.